So a good while ago, I was skimming through YouTube to find a video to play in the background while I did some mundane task at my day job, when I learned that the gaming community had coined a new genre name, friend slop. I had then proceeded to rant on my social media page about how stupid that name was, and that gamers, TM, are horrible at naming things. Clearly I wasn't alone, cause that post got some traction, by the standards of my obscure ass. In theory, this shouldn't be a complicated process, but the internet has mastered the art of taking an insultingly easy task and making it into a colossal mess. To put it simply, a genre name needs to just explain what the media in question is about, and leave it up to gamers to make it into a headache-inducing time sink. Like, enough of a time sink to make into a whole YouTube video. To exemplify my stance against this genre name in particular, it requires us to look at one of the replies to my post. One of my friends, Arrow Dragon, is cursed with having 1% old man energy, despite being slightly younger than me. Not enough to be yelling at kids to get off his lawn, but enough to be out of touch with the slang of younger people. So he saw my post, and was reasonably confused when a genre name given to games like Repo, Lethal Company, and Peak, games that he thoroughly enjoyed, were being called out for being awful. Yeah, your fancy new genre for the most trendy video games in recent memory can be misinterpreted for calling them crap. Truly a genius in naming convention. Ignoring the reason given above, what even makes this so bad? At a basic level, it doesn't even tell you what the primary gameplay loop is. What separates this from a co-op game like Deep Rock Galactic or It Takes Two? You play those games with your friends too? Is there a genre where you play cooperatively with your enemies? Do you even do anything in these games besides dicking around with your friends? I mean, come on. And while Friend Slop is an awful name, I can't be too surprised, since the gaming community has been routinely consistent with naming things horribly, even when they aren't necessary, like Character Action Game. We had two solid genre names that did the job well, Hack and Slash and Beat 'em Ups. Both names put an emphasis on what you do in these heavily combat-oriented titles. So naturally, the logical evolution of our fluid language is to call these titles Character Action Games. So it's a character doing an action? That's literally every video game ever. I guess action is referring to action movies, but that's broad enough that it could also include cinematic games like Uncharted. I'll get to that later. Is the character thing because the personality of the protagonist is put on display? Because some games like DMC 4 and 5 put an emphasis on having multiple playable characters. That's nothing to say about the handfuls of hack and slashes that came out post-DMC that had a protagonist that was more on the stoic side. For shits and giggles, I looked up a definition, and the closest thing I could find was an action game with depth. Wait, so wouldn't that mean that games with some form of tech also counts as... Screw it. I have to stop here, cause I'll just be going in circles for hours. I have to move on. Anyhow, let's move on to stamina action games. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Well, this name makes a little bit more sense. FromSoft has made their mark on the industry with challenging action RPGs and mech games. The former has become pretty popular, with other games deciding to nick some ideas from Dark Souls' laundry list of mechanics, like dropping your currency on death, or the usage of a stamina bar. For some reason, the latter is what everyone assumed the whole game genre should be advertised around. We already had a name for these games called Souls-likes, but I guess that required that people who play Dark Souls-inspired games give a shit about Dark Souls. Yeah, there's clearly no logic in that. It's not bad for describing how the combat ebbs and flows between slow but heavy-hitting swings, though it wasn't just the combat that made FromSoft's games what they are. It was the environment, the atmosphere, the level design with inbuilt shortcuts, the mechanic where you drop your currency, and the subtle storytelling that created an entire video industry of interpretive storytellers. The stamina action games don't incorporate most of these concepts, despite the fact that they are also the elements that would make the Dark Souls-inspired game what it is. Examples such as Another Crab's Treasure and Hollow Knight, two games that don't have a stamina bar, yet wear their FromSoft influences on their sleeves. To varying degrees of shamelessness. Anyhow, I don't think we've gotten enough action games, so let's look into search action. Just in case you were thinking these names were going to get any better, here's one that barely describes the games that's attached to. So Metroid came out and invented a new type of game where you explore a 2D level with hidden nooks and crannies in a claustrophobic environment. Castlevania made a bold step with making Symphony of the Night, an explorative castle-spanning adventure that gave off similar vibes to Super Metroid, with its emphasis on exploration when things open up. What's that? It was inspired by Zelda? Well, so was Metroid, so it's all relative. Metroidvania was coined after Symphony was a smash hit, and it became the new genre that most indie devs wanted to tackle that wasn't a roguelike. I don't understand the point of giving this a new genre name because A, I don't like change, and on a less childish note, B, most of the games in the genre aren't built around exploration to a massive degree. So what are you searching for in these search action games? Games like Dust and Elysian Tale and Gris aren't exactly sprawling, so exploration is placed as a distant second for both games. Moving on to a name that I'm pretty sure will get no pushback from being called bad, we have Action Adventure. It's just action all the way down, huh? Though regardless of any criticisms, I can definitely say that this one won't be getting a revision cause I don't think any replacement name could be made without making it worse. Action Adventure is just the genre where everything applies. It's a generic title given to every game where you go on an adventure and it has some action to break things up. It's so broad that it could fit any game, going from titles like Zelda to Uncharted, and everything in between. It's bad, but I don't think it can be improved since some games out there are so simple that an all-encompassing name is the only thing that can work for it. When going through the many genre names that I know have been called out, a few come to mind, but I think some of them are fine enough, such as walking simulators. I remember hearing the odd complaint from fans of games like Dear Esther, since the name puts extreme emphasis on the only thing you do in the game. And keep in mind, this has nothing to do with the story. It'd be like calling visual novels clicking the screen games. Honestly though, I'm ambivalent to this, since walking around and looking at the scenery is the entire game. I don't really know what you could rename the genre to without omitting that key element. On a basic level, it gets a pass from me. The last one that I want to bring up in this section of the video is JRPG. At one point, some people online tried to argue that this name was racist, and I don't really get it. Unless every vocally loud person online at the time was an X-Play employee or something? I only want to mention this because there's a legitimate criticism with JRPG, and that is the fact that the name JRPG is being used as the replacement for turn-based combat, which I think is dumb. This results in a lot of games that aren't even made by Eastern developers, like Y2K, being called JRPGs. What's next? A Western animated show being called anime? Jeez, the internet is an annoying place. Whine, 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 bitch, bitch, bitch. Do you even know what you want from something this trivial, Ren? I mean, I have a few examples that I like, such as Bullet Heavens, the name given for Vampire Survivor clones. It's such an elegant name for a dumb genre of automatically blasting away hordes of enemies while watching particle effects fly everywhere. The name is also kinda clever, since with Bullet Hells you avoid a storm of enemy fire. In contrast, Bullet Heavens has you avoid a storm of enemies. That's pretty cool. When it comes to the good examples, a basic rule is that it has to explain what genre it even is. The most basic name here, Survival Horror, explains it pretty well. It's a horror game that puts an emphasis on survival. The popularizer of the genre, Resident Evil, set the groundworks for what the games usually are, a mix between spooky environments and terrifying enemies, complemented by the ability to fight them off with a limited degree of success. In some instances, a few titles completely forego combat in place of hiding from the enemies, like Amnesia, or making combat avoidable like in many other games. There's some mix-up between the ones with combat and the ones that are combatless, but both emphasize surviving the horrors in the game world. So, IMO, that one gets a pass. Sticking to horror for a short moment, I remember a long while ago I complained to my peers about how Steam kept shoving FNAF recommendations in between M-rated games like Alien Isolation. Apparently the fans of those games were on a similar train of thought, because a few of them coined the term mascot horror. It hasn't caught on yet, but I do actually think that it works. The reason why I think that it fits is because the point of the character design of these games is to look unthreatening until the point the mascot tries to attack the player. Plus, all the merchandise for these games is built around the spoopy mascot character, in comparison to most adult-based horror games that treat the main characters with the same importance as the one iconic monster from their respective game. Sticking to monsters for a second, let's talk about Doom. It was a step up from Wolfenstein 3D by being a more convincing example of making 3D spaces for video games. The developers who made Doom decided to license the engine around, along with making their base game easier to mod, thus starting the new genre of Doom clone. I'm not sure which game forced the coining of the term first-person shooter to become mainstream, but I think it might have coincided with multiple games coming out not using the Doom engine in combination with id moving on to produce Quake, a game reminiscent of Doom, but it wasn't using the old engine anymore. Nowadays there are many games with different styles going for different vibes, made with different engines, taking cues from different sources, so the idea that all of these games get a unified name for the mechanical similarity of shooting in the first-person perspective is a nice solution. Moving on to games I don't care about, but will probably benefit this video's reach by including Battle Royales. I don't care about Fortnite, but I'm not going to deny its juggernaut status as a massively popular game that also has crossover content with everything under the sun. However, ignoring the algorithm bait for a moment, the genre took its name from a Japanese movie called Battle Royale, and it gained traction as a video game concept through the modding community for Minecraft. Regardless of your opinion looking at it, all of these titles use the same bedrock of ideas. You're dropped into a level, fight other players with whatever you can find in the environment, while dealing with the shrinking area. It's one of those extreme cases where the popularity of one means that the whole genre is eliminated for you. And then you ignore the rest of it to go back to Fortnite, because that's where it has all the cool stuff. I guess the last one might as well be a weird example, because depending on who's watching this video, the given name will be contested for each individual game it's attached to. And no, I'm not talking about immersive sims. I'm talking about roguelikes and roguelites. This is the byproduct of the indie boom from many years ago, and the popularity of rogue in niche gaming spaces where all those nerdy programmers dwell. The name is elegant enough. It's a genre with a bunch of elements shared with the original title, Rogue. A subgenre was made called roguelites, because rogue was a very specific type of game, and attempting to alter the purity of the original meant that a lot of newer games have a lot less in common with the original title. Usually I see the title get pulled out for a game with persistent progression between runs. Though knowing how the community will react, the difference will be something even more granular than mechanics outside of the run. Or, you know, we could just call them all roguelikes and just basically annoy a bunch of people. Never stopped me. Okay, since I was mouthing off for so long about the good, the bad, and the search action, I might as well throw my hat into the ring and coin a better name than friend slop that people will most likely ignore. And in the time I spent typing up the script, I came up with two potential names for titles like Lethal Company, Repo, and Peak. The first one is collaborative co-op games. Working together seems to be the bread, butter, knife, and plate of the whole experience, so putting that all into the forefront makes sense to me. Other co-op games require teamwork, but these games in particular are structured in a way that feels difficult, if not outright impossible, to complete certain objectives on your own. Though that hasn't stopped some masochists out there. The second name that has the potential to catch on is proximity co-op games. All of these games have the feature of using proximity mics to simulate being in the same room as the other player, and if you're half a mile apart, then it's going to be a little bit difficult to hear your teammates calling for help. It's the core pillar of the genre, so you might as well name the whole thing after the tech. Personally, I think this'll work. At least until a new game comes out that breaks the rule by not using proximity mics, forcing all the dweebs of the internet to crawl out of their hole to give it an even blander name like Look Around and Pick Things Up-em-ups, or Search Action.